sustainability, environment, education, and the arts in education, environment, arts, and education. Sorry, I should know that. Research Centre, of which I co-lead with Professor Amy Carter-Mackenzie-Knowles, who's also our Executive Dean of the Faculty of Education. And she can't be here this afternoon, unfortunately. She's interviewing for new positions, so she can't get away. But I'm very pleased and I'm really proud to host today's or this afternoon's seminar. Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge country. I'm on Commonberry country of the Yugambeh language group of the Bundjalung Nation. Very proud to be welcomed as a guest, not a stranger, I'm hoping. Unceded territory, unceded sovereign territory that was never ceded. And I pay my deep respects to the Aboriginal peoples of old and of now, and of course to any of my Aboriginal colleagues in the room this afternoon. So welcome to Jan van Boeckels. Is that how I pronounce it, Jan? I don't want to get it wrong.
More or less, it's okay.
From the Netherlands. Jan's a Dutch artist educator, and I like that distinction, artist educator and researcher. And he was a professor of art and sustainability until the end of last year at the Research Centre Art and Society of Hansa University of Applied Sciences in Groningen. And currently, he's linked as a senior research associate to the Research Centre. Previously, Jan was a senior lecturer in visual art education at the Academy of Design and Crafts of Gothenburg University. And that year, sorry, Gothenburg? Gothenburg.
Yeah.
Yep, that year Jan was also a guest educator and researcher at CEMUS, the Centre for Environment and Developmental Studies in Uppsala in Sweden. From 2015 till 2018, he was professor in art education at the Estonian Academy of Arts in Tallinn. And that is an enormous geographical sweep there, Jan, very impressive. He's also been a program director in design theory at the Iceland University of the Arts in Reykjavik. In 2019, he started teaching painting courses at MK24 in Amsterdam. So Jan has regularly taught and facilitated courses at Schumacher College in Dartington, the UK, at the University College of Southeast Norway, and in previous years also CEMUS in Sweden. So I'm going to hand over to Jan, and please join me in welcoming Jan to our SEAE seminar this afternoon. If we could all turn our mics off. Sandra, I think yours is on. Can hear some background noise, but thank you.
Thank you for the invitation to speak at this occasion for Southern Cross University. And this was about the most extensive introduction to my background I've heard, but thank you for that. Yeah, I suggest I jump right into it. I'll soon share my screen. And I would be very interested to hear what your responses are afterwards, what you make of it, how you resonate, or whatever comes up when you listen to my words and see the images that I share. So I'll start to share the screen. The landscape sinks itself through me is the title of my presentation. This is the image of the eyes as big as plates, an art project. I'll tell a bit more about it later, by Caroline Hjort and Rita Ikonen, woman from Norway and one from Finland. And I start with this quotation from Dutch artist Herman de Vries. He once said, when I breathe, nature enters my lungs. Sometimes I have the feeling that I am not breathing, but that the outside world is breathing me because I'm obliged to breathe. Now, I find it a startling observation that we cannot help but breathe because that's the way our system is. And that's so the relation with the more than other, the larger environment, is already there from the start and unavoidable, if you will. This to me is a kind of expression of the earth breathing. It's the ice moving in Greenland. It's like this inhaling and outhailing of the earth itself. Yeah, and then if you try to connect with such enormous phenomenon, such larger thing larger than ourselves, one way to do it perhaps is through painting. This is an early Swedish artist, Anna Boberg, painting near a glacier. This is a picture here of the Northern Lights. And I'll come back to what painting as a particular form of art making can do in this respect. But I first like to start with talking about the role that art can play. And here I lean on text of Dugald Hein. He has all these properties or special ways of to look at what art can contribute in our world with all of its crises today. I'll just single out a few of them. It says art can give us just enough beauty to stay with the darkness rather than to flee or shut down. I think this is an extraordinary way of putting it. And he says art and its indirect ways of knowing can allow us to approach realities which, if we would look at them directly, turn something inside of us to stone. So that the confrontation with reality can be too hard, too tough, but maybe through an indirect lens we can move closer. Then he talks about art can teach us to live with uncertainty, to let go of our dreams of control, and to hold open a space of ambiguity, refusing the binary choices which we are often presented with. I'll come back to some of these aspects, but I first take a dive back in time to this Dutch artist, Jeroen Bos. He made this drawing, etch, I think it's more, and the title is The Forest That Hears and the Field That Sees. And you see, if you look carefully at the image, that there are ears on the trees, and on the ground, in the grass, there are eyes. It's kind of expressing that the forest, the more than human world, is also conscious of us entering it, being there, that there is a reciprocal relationship. Somehow this relationship, this is a jump in time, but well, actually it was more or less the same period, but it's way back from the here and now. But here, what you see at this other drawing is German missionaries coming to Estonia to cut down the sacred oak tree. And they'll show that it's a bit of echo now, but that if they cut down the sacred oak tree, nothing is going to happen, that the world will not fall down upon them. And they also have the military to approve, to sanction what is going to happen. So maybe before cutting it down at any tree, you would have to ask the spirit of the place, the spirit of the tree, if it was possible to do so. And now, without any remorse or any hesitation, the sacred tree is cut down. In this situation of disconnection, I realize I make quite big leaps here, but I think art is maybe one of the ways, par excellence, where we can find our way back, to trace our way, or maybe it's not back, but forward, to connect again with nature. And here I start to look at the thoughts and the work of Paul Cézanne. He's painting one of the few photographs that you actually see him painting. And there's many remarkable things about him. I mean, he was, you might say, the person who starts the more modernist painting. Pablo Picasso, for example, said that he was very much dependent or motivated in his painting by what Cézanne did. But this, for example, was a painting that he made of a still life, of fresh fruits and a table and a container. And if you look at it very carefully, you would see that the perspective is not right. The table should be like this, but there's kind of a corner out of it on the right-hand side. And the basket with fruit is kind of tilted towards us. Look at it differently. If you would have a table that would be fitting to the image that Cézanne was making, the table would look like this. So something is wrong here from a perspective point of view, from the laws of perspective. it was not that Cézanne was not aware of these laws, but on the contrary, he was painting the way the the phenomenon, the object that he had in front of him was impacting him, how he was relating to it. So he paints how he felt that the image was to him, and maybe more true to how our eyes really observe, rather than following the neat laws of perception. So it was not a photograph, but it was an experience of the place, of the situation. And he said, a minute in the a moment, a minute in the world's life passes, to paint it in its reality and forget everything for that, to become that minute, to be the sensitive plate, give the image of what we see, forgetting everything that has happened before our time. When I start thinking, everything is lost. I am the primitive of the method I have invented. Get to the heart of what is there before you. Day is coming when a single carrot, freshly observed, will set off a revolution. The truth is in nature, and I shall prove it. It's so fine and yet so terrible to stand in front of a blank canvas. I could paint for 100 years, 1,000 years without stopping, and I would still feel as though I knew nothing. Painting from nature is not copying the object, it's realizing one's sensations. Here, on the river's verge, I could be busy for months without changing my place, simply leaning a little more to the right or to the left. Pure drawing is an abstraction. Drawing and color are not distinct. Everything in nature is colored. I want to die painting. So what a passion, what a embrace of life, you might say, that to get to the heart of what is there before you, the sensation of this. And then he started making these paintings. On and on, he visited the same mountain, Saint Ventoux, from different angles, from different light. And then at one point he said, the landscape becomes reflective, human, and thinks itself through me. I become the subjective consciousness of the landscape, and my painting becomes its objective consciousness. And of course, this line has been often been referred to, especially by Maurice Merleau-Ponty, as the expression of phenomenology in its essence, that you in a way let the landscape enter, express itself through your own art making. The shelving or what's it called, suspending all kind of ideas you might have on forehand, but to let the experience itself overwhelm you. Another painter, André Merchant, which is also quoted by Merleau-Ponty, said, in a forest I have felt many times over that it was not I who looked at the forest. Some days I felt that the trees were looking at me, were speaking to me. I was there listening. I think that the painter must be penetrated by the universe and not want to penetrate it. And the Merleau-Ponty comments on it. At that point, it becomes impossible to distinguish between who sees and who is seen, who paints and what is painted. And you will recall the drawing of Jeroen Bos, the same idea of this interrelationship. Forest is paying attention to whoever would enter it. And these sentiments, these ways of looking at our circumambient universe are in trouble in a way. This is a shift now to the subject of the shifting baseline. Because, of course, in our today's world, our attention is kind of hijacked. So, for example, with these girls, while they are together with each other, they could have conversations with each other, which they also will do, I suppose. But much of the attention is somewhere else, which is somehow more exciting. So, not very much with the landscape or the place at hand. Richard Louv wrote this book in 2005, The Last Child in the Woods, Saving Our Children from Nature Deficit Disorder. It's been translated in many languages. Together with my partner, I translated it into Dutch, Het laatste kind in het bos. One of the points he makes in the book is that if you ask children about tropical rainforest, like teenagers, they will have learned on school that the rainforest is like the green lungs of the earth. And every second area the size of a football field is cut. But they know hardly anything about the field behind their house. And he says something is quite out of balance here. It's not that we shouldn't teach children about the tropical rainforest, but how come that this connection with their own place, their own environment is so diminished? In a way, we have forgotten, generation after generation, how nature was before. This phenomenon is called nature amnesia. So this was the kind of plates that were my parents were looking at at school. There's a quite abundant ecosystem. Several of these species are now extinct in the Netherlands, and that was the nature as they was a reality for them. But the generation that is alive now has a diminished idea of what nature represents, what it is, because it's no longer part of their lived reality. So this is a shifting baseline of what we are used or accustomed to look at as nature as it is. So we don't really feel its impoverishment. This statics, these metrics are showing this also, that British children that are struggling to name common wildlife and plants in 2019. So 83 of them are unable to identify a bumblebee. 82 are unable to identify an oak leaf. And at the bottom, almost all can recognize a fox, of course. But this has profound consequences because certain words, ways in which we identify species are also disappearing from dictionaries. There was a project of Robert McFarlane to point this out, that our language is also impoverished because it's no longer relevant, no longer part of our live world to relate to certain species. And then we are faced with so-called wicked problems. A wicked problem is a bit like this. It's Hercules fighting the monster Hydra, and you all probably know if he cuts off or knocks out one head, there's two that pop up instead. So it's unsolvable. The problems even become worse while trying to solve them. And part of the problem here is captured in this graph is that we have this tunnel vision. So much of our attention is on carbon emissions, rightly so. I mean, but we don't see the web of connections, which the larger eco crisis, if you will, of the other heads of the Hydra that we are also facing. So when we try to solve one problem in isolation, the others start to grow simultaneously. And what is plaguing us here maybe is what Gregory Bateson would call purposive consciousness. Purposive means that you're obsessed of a firm purpose. So here we see Pavlov with the dog. He's very goal-directed, training the dog to when he hears the sound of a bell, that he will get food, and then after some time, only the sound of the bell will cause the dog to create saliva in his mouth. He's conditioned very purposefully to be excited when the sound of the bell will promise food. It's this idea that we think of moving from A to B and then from B to C in a linear sequence, or if we say if A, then B will follow, much like an arrow going from one place to the other. This is the way our logic is, our formal logic is trained. And this becomes a problem, as Bateson and others have pointed out. For example, when there is a plague, like this insect eating the wheat, then the immediate solution is to use a lot of poison like DDT, and leading to a silent spring, which was the first book raising the alarm about the environmental crisis by Rachel Carson in the 1960s. If you unpack this, that the logical thinking is A to B. So there's a plague, and then we do is we use poison. But maybe something, if we take something in isolation, the A to B, that is part of a larger circle, a larger cycle. This is Bateson, we perceive and then rely on only short arcs, which we see a straight line, linear causality. So we think this is a linear process, but we lose access to the total integrated network. And then Bateson says, if you use DDT to kill insects, you may succeed in reducing the insect population so far that the insectivores will starve. You will then have to use more DDT than before to kill the insects, which the birds no longer eat. More probably, you will kill off the birds in the first round when they eat the poisoned insects. So because we look at only a small causal relationship, we forget the larger picture, and we keep, like Hercules and the Hydra, we try to solve one isolated problem at the expense of the larger picture. This is what defines a wicked problem. These are a type of ill-defined, complex, systemic, and purportedly unsolvable problems. They're comprised of seemingly unrelated, but yet interdependent elements, each of which manifest as problems in their own right at multiple levels of scale. So suddenly, at one point, there are floods, and completely surprising everybody, this is happening. And then the ability to solve wicked problems will call for new thinking about design, our world, and the human relationship to it. This was, by the way, by Terry Irwin of Position Design. So notice that she says solve wicked problems between quotation marks, because can we really ever solve them? It's maybe our predicament that we're stuck with them. There's an image of which you can see every day in Amsterdam, where a wicked problem is the return of the bottles. So that a new law said that every plastic bottle should be you pay some amount for, or a beer can where you buy them, and you get that money in return if you return it to the shop. But many people still throw the rubbish away, and then people with less or no money, they will open up the garbage bags to find these cans and to be able to get the money. So everywhere in the city you have now these new rubbish heaps and rats coming there as a unforeseen consequence of doing something sustainable, namely that you ask people to pay a little extra for when they buy a beer can. And how do you solve this then again? It's one problem leading to the other. And here I'd like to show a bit of Bayo Akobalafe, a Nigerian thinker, also psychoanalyst. And he talks about our current predicament.
Well, post-activism is the name that I give to the idea that we need to slow down. The times are urgent. Let us slow down. It's paradoxical. When times are urgent, when things are urgent, you want to speed things up, right? You want to do more. You want to get in there. But I feel that we are in such a moment when our vision of our place in the world is changing. Our vision of ourselves as humans, our vision of our environment as resource, all these things are changing, and we can no longer see ourselves in the same way. Now, this is not just a story we're telling ourselves. This is really concrete, consequential stuff. For instance, there's a whole story and narrative around climate change, and that climate change is just weather patterns disturbing the narrative of development. And so what do? We stop it. We do our best to stop climate change, or we do our best to adapt our systems so that we can mitigate the impacts of climate change. But, just the phenomenon of climate change is bringing us to realize that we have and have always had an impact on the world. And as a result, we can no longer distinguish ourselves from the environment. We are not separate from the world that we claim to be part of. We are the environment. We are part of the world. And so there's an upsurge of wisdom coming from multiple disciplines, from biology to sociology to psychology to quantum physics, that is telling us a different story. What they're telling us is that we are relational beings. We are essentially non-essential. We are relationships. We are not things in a vacuum, in a container. We are the earth touching itself in a way.
So I think what Bayo is saying here very eloquently, that there is a need of a different story, and that which is already unfolding, which shifts the emphasis maybe not to the wicked problems in isolation, but to look at the interdependencies, to look at the interrelationships. And I think in order to be able to do that, we in many ways need to make a jump. And this idea of jump is also get from Gregory Basin. You see an image of him here. What he would do when he was a professor at Santa Cruz University in California, he would encourage his students to read as much as they could Alice in Wonderland through the looking glass. And here you have the image of the rabbit hole where Alice is entering a different world where things are upside down and not quite as logic as you might assume. Through the looking glass, Alice comes to these creatures, these insects, and she is taken. She's shown around by a net, it's a mosquito-like creature, and she meets the bread and butterfly, which is very remarkable, as its head is made of a lump of sugar, and in order to survive, it drinks weak tea with cream in it. And there we have a problem, and Gregory is going to explain where this problem is at. Here we have Alice, here we have the net, and this is the bread and butterfly.
The net is still a small voice explaining the insects of Through the Looking Glass land to Alice. We don't have butterflies, we have bread and butterflies. And the bread and butterfly has wings of very thin slices of bread and butter and a head made of a lump of sugar. Alice says, what does it live on? And that says weak tea with cream in it. Alice saw a difficulty. So she said, what happens if it can't find any? The net says, it dies. Alice says, that must happen rather often. The net says, it always happens. The double bind in which the bread and butterfly finds himself, namely that if he gets his food, his head dissolves in it. Therefore, his only hope of survival is not to find any food, but then he starves. And this is, you see, a formal double bind of the simplest kind.
So I believe what Gregory Bates is unpacking here is the phenomenon of a double bind from an area of storytelling, of the imagination. But he's pointing to an insolvable situation, because anything the bird or butterfly might do will cause its death. And I think this is many aspects of this wicked problem idea, that we're basically faced with unsolvable riddles. The youngest daughter of Gregory Bateson, Nora Bateson, followed up on this with the idea of the double bind. And she says, the double bind is a pattern in which there seems no solution for escape. On the other side of it, however, there is another stage of wisdom. Double bind, she says, motivates evolution, finding a third alternative to survive. It's a creative imperative. It's the moment when, because this doesn't work and that doesn't work, something else is going to need to be improvised. So you have to make a jump to get out of that situation. Can we see a bigger picture? Can we think about the way we think? And this is like what is called meta thinking or meta learning, that you are thinking about the patterns of our thinking, which is maybe much part of the problem. Example in evolution, there's also a point of both Batesons, that the double bind is a driving force in evolution. A clear example of this is the bee orchid, you see here. The bee orchid has this shape on its top of the flower, which looks like a bee, attracting the bees to get the honey, to mate with the bee on the flower. And in doing so, they pick up the pollen, so that the reproduction of the bee orchid is organized that way. But in reality, this bee that you see here, which is imitated in this flower form, this bee is already extinct for a long time. So this orchid is self-pollinating as a new strategy to survive, to cope with this double bind, that the bee is no longer there. And but in the long time, it is said that this bee orchid is doomed, because if it's only self-pollinating, it's not sustainable or survivable in the long run. So it's one way in which nature is facing a riddle, a double bind, and working its way out to get out of that situation. What Einstein, it's a question if he ever said it really, but he's often quoted to have said, we can't solve problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them. So again, alluding to the jump that we need to make. Bio, who we just heard, says, what if the way we respond to the crisis is part of the crisis? So that we are going in circles. Maybe what we need to do is what is called unlearning. It's a bit a funny word because can we ever really forget the learning that is already so much part of our system? When I was at school, I was sitting at tables like this, all children isolated from each other, looking a bit up at the teacher. One kid is looking out of the window, connected to a larger than human world. But this is basically education, how it is still organized in many places. The idea is that the teacher is going to transfer his or her knowledge, like this coffee filter. It's pouring the knowledge into the head of the tabula rasa, the empty slate of the learner. And it's preparing learners for the market place, in the learning economy. And it is pushing them to what's called lifelong learning, which is moving the learning from a right to a duty. You have to keep on learning. The philosopher of education. So that you are forced to learn it. It's not so much the emphasis on the curiosity, but the knowledge transfer. Often also with standardized testing, because you then can have a multiple choice and there's only one answer valid. Never it is A and D, or maybe not A, B, C, and D, but answer E. So the scale of possibilities is limited. And of course, this makes the statistical handling of the results very easy. Somehow we are moved away from this situation, like this child asked to paint a tree, or maybe from her own initiative, which is a very much personal expression of a tree, but different from anybody else. At some point after the age of 7, we start to make trees like this. Many of us, a cloud filled with green and 2 lines that you filled with brown, the trunk of the tree. And somehow this becomes our autopilot. If we're asked to make a tree, it will look like this often, because we feel safe that we are obliging to the norm of how to paint trees. A move away from this, I would say, is to, again, maybe along the ideas of Cézanne and others, to go again to the direct experience of phenomenon around us, back to the things themselves. So this girl, for example, there's a frog on her head. There is no screen and no interface between her and the living creature. Or where art can come in here is this artwork of Erika Fielder, where the woman herself has a sombrero on his head and a few seeds are put there. So if you sit a long time in silence, very still, then maybe a wild creature like this bird feels safe enough to land in your head to feel its movements. So that art can be a way of enhancing our antennae to the world, so to make sense of the world. And it's an interesting aspect, I think, that the word aesthetic, the roots of it in Greek, aesthesis means perceiving the world through the senses. So our ideas of beauty, sublime, ugliness, and so on, its core is to meet the world through the senses. And there's a relationship between aesthetics and anesthetics. So for aesthetics, it involves opening up to the world, that only if you open your hand, you can receive the gift, so to speak, be able to be in a position to experience a sense of wonder. First is numbing of oneself to the world, where you close your senses off. So anesthetics is what is done on you when you are about to have an operation, that your senses are turned off. And insight is growing, especially through phenomenology, is that our senses are informing our way of thinking. So, for example, in this book of Juhani Palasma from Finland, he talks about how our hand is really guiding our brain, our thinking, rather than it is the command center of our brain giving instructions to our hands. That really the feeling body, the eyes of the skin, is informing the way we make sense of the world. And it's interesting that Ansel Adams, the photographer, said it's the soup that steers the cook. So It's whatever you're working with, that it's influencing the creator of the one trying to make sense of it, so that the movement is in the other direction. I think in these creative processes of meeting the world, meeting nature through art, there is a movement from the receptive, the sensitivity to the environment, and the creative to act upon the world, between sensing and making. Like it's a revolving circle that as soon as you start to feel the moss on the skin, like in the case of this girl, you get new meaning making, which informs the other movements that you're going to make. That it's surrendering to the world, being overwhelmed, and at the same time making new moves to explore further. And like if we want to do this more profoundly in this counter move against the standardized education, I think the phenomenon of open-endedness is very important. Open-ended processes mean that you basically don't know the outcome on forehand. You have to surrender to the newness, to the unforeseenness. Anton Ehrenswijk once pointed out the different routes that artists can take. He calls this the hidden order of art. What you see here is all the different alternative routes that artists make from a point of departure, and they come to open ends, and there are nodal points, and there are dead ends. Many places where you come to a stop, you become stuck, you have to start again. So it's basically an artistic process. It's very open-ended, that you probe your way forward. Rebecca Solnit calls this the art of getting lost. As she says, paradoxically, to be lost is to be fully present, and to be fully present is to be capable of being in uncertainty and mystery. Job of artists is to open doors and to invite in the unknown, the unfamiliar. To calculate on the unforeseen is perhaps exactly the paradoxical operation that life most requires of us. So I think this is a huge paradox, to calculate, to be prepared for the unforeseen, to be ready for the unforeseen. And this is what life asks most of us. If you recall Bates and the double bind in the orchard, constantly you're faced with situations that leave no way out, but artists are maybe better equipped to welcome them. This is Anthony Gormley when he was at Schumacher College in 2006. I was facilitating the course, and he did an activity which I've come to term making a little me. What you do is you make a sculpture of your own body with your eyes closed. And somebody guides you through the process. It's from the feet all the way up through the legs to the stomach, the shoulders. So it's bit by bit you create a version of yourself, but doing so without looking, just feeling what is happening in your body. This, I facilitated it many times. Here I do this at the island of Gotland outside. You see the people have their eyes closed, and I take them through a journey in their body. And what you get is maybe not aesthetically directly pleasing or accurate figures, but very much expressions of what people pick up, what is going on inside of their body. So it's an outward expression of what they perceive inwardly. And I would say this is very open-ended. Nobody knows on forehand what kind of sculptures will come out. And it is a big surprise to see your own naked body in miniature, if you will, and to see those of others at the same time who are doing the same at the same moment. I think open-ended is also about allowing for creative misunderstandings. If you're walking, like for example in this mountain area, if your attention is how will I make my way forward? How do I follow the track and not stumble? So when you're talking, part of your attention is elsewhere than to the conversation, and you don't look each other into the eye all the time. You're not all the time registering if you're making sense, or maybe the other person finds it boring what you're saying. And this actually gives much freedom, because you're not all the time aware if you come across in the way you hope. So this phenomenon I use in a workshop, which I teach often, a course in a national park in Estonia on art and sustainability education, where people walk in pairs, and they walk along this big lake. And in the first half, one of the person in the pair tells the other a story of a meaningful walk, an important walk that they once have made in their life. and the other just listens. And then second half, the roles are switched. The listener becomes teller, and the teller becomes listener. So the other person talks about a meaningful walk. Then they all gather, and the person who has been listening tells the story of the meaningful walk of the other to the group, if that's okay for the person to do so. Then what happens is that you get very creative misunderstandings, which might go like, oh, did you get this out of my story? I never paid so much attention to that, but it's actually interesting that you highlight this. Or the other way around, that you miss something essential for me in the story, which I still like to add. So the fact that you emphasize or highlight things or miss out on other things is actually an interesting situation that can stimulate further exploring what the story is about. I learned this, by the way, from Alan Bolden to this workshop. Another open-ended process I do in Estonia is to paint with the wind, like this tree that is moving in the wind, and then you can make a painting by holding it, and that in the storm, the brush moving on the branch of the tree is creating its own painting with you. In short, if you develop these kind of forms of education, you're moving into what Stefan Sterling called sustainable education. And he says educators for change need a larger understanding of the nature of an emergent, ecological, participatory worldview. Importance of whole systems thinking is something he emphasizes. And we need to change from transmissive towards transformative learning. So not knowledge transfer necessarily, but education that actually changes you. And he says it's not so much about education about sustainability or for sustainability, but education as sustainability. Therefore, this notion of sustainable education, that sustainability is very much in the heart of what education is about. And lately, this is the new term, I would say, is regenerative education or regenerative learning. I'll come to speak more about this. But something I worked on myself is this field of art-based environment education, which is basically about how do we learn about the more than human world, about our environment, by starting with artistic processes, by engaging the senses, evoking imagination, and through that to acquire knowledge. So ecology, art, and education together. This is my dissertation on it from the Aalto University. If you want, you can easily find it on the internet as PDF, At the Heart of Art and Earth. And basically, arts-based environment education is about developing sensitivity to the environment through artistic activities, engaging the senses, acquiring knowledge, for example, making a drawing of a plant, learning about botany, or learning where food comes from, what grows under the earth, what grows above, what comes from the sea, and so on. Evoking the imagination, for example, using loose ends, things that you might find in the forest, and making a playful activity with it. Or finding forms that resonate or resemble natural forms. And this was also this project where I started out with the Ice's Biggest Plates, where Rita Ikonen and Caroline Hewitt asked people to represent their own local place, their environment, through the natural materials at hand there in a very proud way. I mentioned already regenerative education. This idea of regenerative is different from sustainability. A sustainable system maintains its integrity and can continue indefinitely under current conditions, but it might include undesirable elements. So it just keeps going on in a sustainable way. A regenerative system, by contrast, improves the conditions of life to flourish, increasing resilience and abundance. Here, human activity enhances both ecosystems and social systems. I think this is important that also the social dimension is there, that there is actually an improvement through the regenerativity. This is very well articulated in this thesis that just came out a week ago by Kelly Rose Pearson, Regenerative Imaginaries. I would encourage you to look it up. It's available as PDF. This move towards regenerative imaginaries. Basically, at the core is the idea that we are fundamentally entangled, like we're in knots, which is basically both a negative aspect, that we are strangled, we are limited, we cannot escape from our entanglement, but also has this positive aspect that we are fundamentally dependent on other life forms. It was also highlighted, interestingly, by the first romantics like Friedrich Schelling. He says that the opposite between humans and nature is only artificial, that its nature recognizes its works through us, that basically we become an organ of nature to make sense of itself. Nature needs us to be complete. You'll find many of this articulation in this book by Andrea Wolff, where she, Magnificent Rebels, about the first romantics, about how they were trying to think through this deeper relationship we have with an other than human world. Gregory Basin, here with his daughter Nora, would say that aesthetics is being responsive to the pattern which connects. I think this is a very interesting way of looking at aesthetics. Remember, aesthetics in its root means perceiving the world through the senses. And he would say that the domain, that the relationship to beauty is fundamentally that you are responsive, that you tune into the pattern which connects, as he called it. And the pattern which connects, he once described as, what is the pattern that connects the crab, the lobster, and the primrose, the orchid, and all of them to me, and me to you. So it's this web of relations, this infinite web of relationships unfolding themselves, which is very much going against this reductionist notion that you need to take nature apart in the smallest bit to understand it. Here he was looking more in a holistic way. What is the larger pattern that is connecting them all? Later, this notion of the more than human came up, coined first by David Abram in the book The Spell of the Sensuous. And the more than human is, you might say, that very basically that this is the human community, the family's social fabric, the human world. More than human world is something larger, but it still encompasses the human, the social dimension. So, like the romantic would say, that nature also needs us in a certain way, that we are very much part of this more than human world. So it's not a binary that humans against the non-human world. And the more than human world would also continue under the ground, under our feet, in the soil. Even more so, you will find the more than human world inside of humans, in our systems. So the human microbiome contains trillions of microorganisms, outnumbering human cells by 10 to 1. So there's maybe more not human species inside of us than our own cells.
As the cricket's soft autumn hum is to us, so are we, the trees, as are they to the rocks and the hills.
This is a poem by Gary Snyder. This is his wife reflecting on this poem.
As the cricket's soft autumn hum is to us, so are we to the trees, as are they to the rocks and the hills. There's a wonderful compression in a poem of an incredibly long span of time, going from the soft-bodied crickets and their even shorter than their bodies, their little sound that they make, to the rocks and the hills that they live in. It goes from the crickets' sentient bodies to us with our larger, longer, slightly longer lasting bodies, to the trees who to us seem really long-lived, but to the hills seem as the crickets do to us. It's a really beautiful poem, isn't it? It's a wonderful poem.
So what Carol Koda brings in here is also the temporal dimension, the timescape, or the temporal imagination as a dimension of the more than human. I think, thinking about the more than human world is lately more and more informed also through eco-feminist thinking, also earlier by people like Val Kimwood, work of Deborah Bird Rose from Australia, and Anna Singh, The Mushroom at the End of the World. to point at this interconnectivity, this braided web of relationships. I'm just checking with Lexi. Do I still have time? Because I'm realizing that.
Well, you've got 7 minutes, but I don't know whether you wanted to have some time for discussion or questions. It's up to you.
Yeah, if we have to stop at 7 minutes, maybe it would be nice to open the floor now for questions, because I would really like to see if people would like to share some thoughts in response to this.
Yes, I think that's a good idea. We've got quite a few people here from lots and lots of different perspectives, but what a fabulous presentation, Jan. Thank you so much. It's so textured. I was making notes and, trying to write down all the reading suggestions, and I thought, oh, I'll just wait till the recording comes out and I'll get it. But what a wonderful presentation across art, aesthetics, poetry, film, philosophy, literature, nature, history, mathematics, walking, making, listening, speaking, poetry, film. Fantastic. So if you can join me, please, everyone, in giving Jan a round of applause before we open it to questions. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. It's absolutely up our alley at INSEE, where we're looking at transdisciplinary work across sustainability, across environmental education, across poetry and art and climate change education. It's just such a perfect fit. And I noticed that Amy joined us, and I'm wondering if Amy has any comment to make before we ask others.
Well, thanks, Jan. That was lovely, and I came in just as you started. And I was really quite taken with what you were saying about, I guess, carbon tunnel vision, and I can relate to that, and I wondered if you'd talk more about that a bit more, noting that I think climate education or carbon futures, it to me it does happen in a very relational and can be post-human way, but I know in a dominant Western sense it's not always. But in any case, you certainly took my mind down an interesting path there. So back to you. That is my question around if you could talk a little bit more about that, and if you've done much work there, and what you see as a way forward.
Thank you. You mean specifically about this carbon tunnel vision? If I could expand a bit on this.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the idea is not of myself, of course, but what I take from it is that this whole notion of tunnel vision is that you have kind of put on blinders, or, that you only look at a very limited field in front of you. The point that also Gregory Basin made in relationship to the poison, the DDT, and the insects, that if you look at only the small arc, you don't see the larger circle. So I think it's a problem that with the best of intentions, that many people focus on a bit of the big puzzle, like, for example, trying to reduce the emissions, but then problems pop up in rather unexpected areas and other places, as the phenomenon of Hydra, that a wicked problem shows up that we didn't think of before. And I think, so my personal relationship to this is, if this is the situation, maybe then it makes sense to follow up on the suggestion of people like Gregory Basin to look for this pattern that connects. So rather than isolating problems in themselves, it's not wrong in itself, I would emphasize. I mean, the carbon emissions are a real problem, but to look for this pattern that connects, to this larger connection of patterns, that to get a more holistic, a more view of the whole, not exclusively, but to be aware of what is the larger picture in which this is configuring. And I think lately, for example, with internet and now with AI and mobile phones, that the ubiquity, the omnipresence of these phenomena are so profound and impact us so much, that they are a large wicked problem in its own right, sort of what I called hijacking our attention. So in working with younger generations, I think it is of pivotal importance to re-establish these direct experiences of the living world.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That's lovely.
That's lovely.
Back to you, Lex.
Thanks, Amy. Thanks, Jan. Is anyone else would like to come forward with a question or a comment? Lerna, you've got your mic open. Please go ahead.
Yeah. So hello everyone. I am joining from England, but originally I'm from Istanbul. I'm a dancer and educator, and for many years I work on embodied learning possibilities in kindergartens and primary schools. And at the moment where we all came with the crisis of the world and the change in the mainstream system, but not really change, like we are experiencing this in-betweenness. And I'm really wondering how to transfer all this knowledge and then the change of the perspective and application that Professor Jan van Boeckel, sorry for the if I said the pronounced the name a bit wrong. I'm just really wondering how we will able to integrate all this information to um, teacher faculties who are developing new systems for teachers for educate the pupils or having this offering this wide experience of learning. I just want to ask him, do you have any experiences on this, like a bit changing of teacher trainings in the universities and then maybe opening up these kind of lessons, really like art-based learning, ecology-based learning. It has been a long time that I graduated from teacher faculty, but I'm really wondering how this is going because there are lots of many little things are happening, but I don't think we really see a change in teacher education yet. So I'm wondering your observations, your thoughts, and if you have any experiences in teacher education.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lena, for this question. Now, I think it's again also an essential question, a very important question. My own answer to it, if it is an answer, I would say more my approach is to have intensive courses. Like this course, I showed a few examples in Estonia, which lasts 3 days in a near national park, because I think something opens up if you are together with people for 3 days, which doesn't happen if you have only a lesson like 1 or 2 hours. And one of the things that happens is that time itself becomes a teacher. So I'm very much taken by this idea of the Reggio Emilia pedagogy for early childhood, which is this idea that we have 3 teachers. The first teachers for the young children are the other children of the same age, their peer group, that they learn most from each other. Then the second teachers are the adults in their life, their parents, or the teachers at the school, the pedagogistas and the artilleristas. And they say the third teacher is the environment, the space where things are happening. So that it is not at all irrelevant where things take place, the arena. So if you are in a national park, for example, for an isolated moment of time, something happens there that doesn't happen at any other place. But I would like to add that maybe there's a fourth teacher, and that is the time. Because time allows you to really sink into the experience and to reflect on it more deeply, but also to see the interconnections, the pattern that connects. So at one moment in these 3 days, we might have a seminar on what do we mean with sustainability, which is more theoretical, the concept. Another moment, we might be making drawings beside a river with our eyes closed. And then if you have these kind of activities, or the walk that I showed in the slides of the meaningful walk where you tell somebody else about the walk that you once made in your life, if you have these activities alternating itself from the theoretical, more conventional approach to education to the very much embodied experience, and then you start to reflect on the interrelationships. What does this open up? What are the dimensions that are resonating between these levels? Then there is a whole new way of making meaning. Or if you have a silent walk through the first half an hour, and then after that look at the documentary on a subject, the silence of the silent walkers will inform the viewing of the film. And what I get out of it, why I think this is so effective, is I ask the students, these are in teacher education or art teacher education mostly, but also from design, about 20 people take part. I ask them to write an essay in which they reflect how they look back at this experience and how they integrate it in whatever point they are in their life or in their studies. And these essays are just wonderful. That you get things like, now I know again why I choose to be an art teacher. So it's a kind of reconnection or becoming more vivid what took them there to, but it's like an opening that they don't usually get in conventional schooling. So part of my answer would be that we need to develop these more intensive activities, and it's, I think, because it's also about reconnecting the teachers in education, the becoming teachers with their own deep experiences through art in a natural environment, and through that being better able to facilitate it themselves when they are meeting younger people, younger generations. So it starts with your own connection before you can maybe even start to facilitate it for others.
That's a wonderful answer to a very interesting question. And I couldn't agree more that it needs to start with art, an immersive art experience on country, outside in nature. Couldn't agree more. I see Narelle shaking, nodding your head as well, going, yep, 100%. All right, well, we are over time, but I want to thank you all for coming along, and thank you so much, Professor Boeckel, for presenting a very rich, idiosyncratic, and complex critical presentation that has art at its core. We really appreciate you coming along, and hopefully one day you'll be able to come and visit us at SEAE.
Thank you for the invitation.
It would be great.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
I just thought to add that some people would like mention notes, but I can make the PDF available through you if you want to look things up.
And then and then we can distribute. That'd be great. Thank you, Jan. Thank you very much.
Yes, Jan.
Appreciate your time. Amy?
Thank you, Jan. That was lovely. And looking to a visit down the track.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Manage that.
Yeah,
That's really beautiful.